Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, the fascinating and often pretty tumultuous history of papal elections, those secretive gatherings we call conclaves.
And we'll also be looking at the really significant challenges and the qualities being discussed as the Catholic Church gets ready, eventually, to select its next leader.
Right. This is definitely for you if you're keen on understanding maybe a complex historical and contemporary process, but, quickly and thoroughly.
Yeah, we've sifted through a lot, historical accounts, just brimming with drama and honestly some surprising turns. And then there are these contemporary analyses of the weighty issues facing the church and what people are looking for in the next pope.
Okay, so our mission here. To pull out the crucial bits from all that, we want to give you a clear picture of how popes actually get chosen, the pretty rich historical backdrop, and the major factors that are likely going to influence the next selection. Okay, let's dive in.
Let's maybe start with the image most of us have, right? The white smoke billowing from the Sistine Chapel, Pope Francis being announced.
Yeah, that
simple signal really underscores the, intense secrecy around modern conclaves. I mean,
Right.
Once those doors are sealed, it's just a world of speculation until pop, that white smoke appears.
It's interesting. The recent ones felt pretty quick, didn't they? Francis Benedict XVI. It kind of suggests maybe a calm, pious approach these days.
That's certainly the modern image. But if we look back at the history, it's a very different picture.
Oh, yeah.
For a lot of the church's history, these elections were anything but orderly or swift. Honestly, some of them sound more like, one source called them glorified playground squabbles.
Playground squabbles. Okay, now I'm interested.
Yeah, only, much longer, much more unpleasant, and often significantly more corrupt.
Right. Okay. So let's get into some of these turbulent elections. Where should we start? That never-ending story, one.
Yes. The election of 1268 to 1271, absolutely remarkable. It lasted almost 3 years after Clement IV died. The longest papal election ever. And the initial conditions, they were surprisingly lax. Cardinals were housed pretty comfortably. They could come and go as they pleased.
Sounds civilized, maybe, but not exactly efficient. I guess that led to, nearly 3 years of deadlock.
Exactly. Deadlock, bitter arguments. The infighting dragged on for so long that 3 of the 20 cardinal electors actually died during the process.
Wow. So the locals must have been getting impatient.
The people of Viterbo, where the court was located then, they grew extremely frustrated. Understandably.
Frustrated enough to take action, I gather.
Oh, they did. Driven to their wits' end, the Viterbesi locked the Cardinals inside the Palazzo dei Papi.
Locked them in.
Yep. Cut their diet down to bread and water.
Yeah.
Pretty clear incentive to, make a decision.
And isn't there a story about the roofs?
Legend has it, that they even partially removed the roof of the palace to further encourage them.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
So this whole episode, this forceful intervention, actually gave us the word conclave, right? With keys.
Precisely. Locked in. And it definitely motivated the eventual winner, Pope Gregory X, to start laying down the rules for modern conclaves. It shows how, chaos can sometimes lead to structure.
A direct consequence, but those reforms didn't stick immediately, did they? What about extra hominies in 1280?
Right. Gregory X's reforms weren't an instant fix. That election, 1280 to 81, shows that things stayed pretty chaotic for the rest of that century.
So the Cardinals were still hard to manage.
Well, the ambition, the political horse trading, it was still rampant. Cardinals were apparently dashing in and out of the Palazzo dei Papi in Viterbo again, just making it almost impossible to agree.
So the locals stepped in again?
The Viterbesi, yeah.
Yeah.
This time, they violently ejected 2 cardinals, Matteo Orsini and his kinsman Giordano, for apparently impeding the election.
Violently ejected. Okay. They really weren't messing around.
No, it just highlights that constant struggle trying to separate the politics from choosing a spiritual leader.
Okay, let's jump forward a bit. 1378. The crazy compromise. What was happening then?
All right, so the College of Cardinals was finally back in Rome after decades away in Avignon. And the Roman people were putting on serious pressure for an Italian pope. A Roman, or at least an Italian.
But the Cardinals themselves were still divided.
Oh, deeply divided, which led to, you guessed it, more prolonged negotiations.
So how did this crazy compromise happen?
Well, basically out of sheer desperation, someone threw out the name Bartolomeo Prignano. He was the Archbishop of Acerenza. Pretty obscure. Wasn't even a cardinal.
Not a cardinal.
Nope. Largely unknown. But the electors were exhausted, so they agreed. He became Pope Urban VI, and, it turned out to be, as one account puts it, a ghastly mistake.
Ghastly mistake sounds ominous. What went wrong?
Urban VI turned out to be Violently unhinged is a phrase used.
Yeah.
He developed this severe persecution complex, started locking up cardinals, supposedly torturing them.
Torturing cardinals?
His behavior was so extreme it actually split the church in two. It triggered the Great Schism, which was devastating. And, maybe unsurprisingly, he was the last non-cardinal ever elected pope.
Wow. A stark reminder of how things can go sideways. Okay, on to 1458. The scrummage. The church is past the schism now. Rules are more set.
Supposedly more set, yeah. But this election shows that rules don't always tame ambition. Or tempers. Cardinal de Stadtville was dead set on becoming pope after Calixtus III died.
And he wasn't subtle about it.
Not really. He was apparently holding secret meetings, get this, in the latrines, trying to bribe and intimidate his colleagues.
In the latrines, seriously. Classy. Did it work?
Nope. Another cardinal, Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, quickly emerged as a frontrunner, and de Stadtville was, well, furious.
And what happened?
During the final ballot, cardinals could change their votes. Cardinal Prospero Colonna stood up to switch his vote to Piccolomini, which would put him just one vote short. De Stadtville just lost.
Lost it how?
He and one of his supporters physically grabbed Colonna, tried to drag him out of the chapel to stop him changing his vote.
A literal brawl in the conclave.
A full-blown scrummage right there in the Sistine Chapel. And somehow, amidst all that chaos, Piccolomini got elected as Pope Pius II. Just shows the intense personal stakes.
Unbelievable. Okay, next up. 1492. A buyer's market. This sounds bad. Like, corruption really took hold.
Yeah, this is often seen as a real low point. As the papacy got more powerful and wealthy, wanting the top job became more intense, and elections got heavily tied up with simony, buying and selling church positions, the 1492 conclave is considered maybe the worst example.
And who was the main player here?
Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia. Ferociously ambitious, very worldly. He was determined to be pope and allegedly threw around massive bribes.
Like how massive?
Well, one account mentions 4 mule loads of silver, plus lucrative church posts worth over 10,000 ducats a year. Just to one cardinal, Ascanius Sforza.
4 mule loads of silver?
Rome was apparently awash with Borgia money. And, well, it worked. He became Pope Alexander VI.
Just scandalous. Okay, let's jump ahead. 1590, King Philip votes. That title is intriguing. Kings aren't supposed to vote, are they?
No. Strictly speaking, only cardinals vote. But you have to remember, the church back then was also a major European power, an elective monarchy in a way. So it was always sensitive to outside pressure. Catholic kings naturally wanted a pope friendly to them.
So they tried to influence things, but King Philip II of Spain went further.
Exactly. Instead of just, funding his favorites, Philip wanted more direct control. He had designs on the French throne too, apparently. So just before the conclave, his ambassador circulated 2 lists.
Right.
One was 7 cardinals Philip found acceptable, and another list vetoing 30 others.
30 vetoed, and the cardinals just accepted this?
Well, Philip II was incredibly powerful in Europe at the time, so yes, they largely complied. This event really marked a shift, and it evolved into this formal right of royal veto, the arius exclusivae, the right of exclusion.
The right of exclusion?
Yeah, various Catholic monarchs used it right up until 1903. A long period of direct political interference.
Fascinating. Okay, moving on. 1644, the Brothers Grimm. Sounds like family drama.
A very fitting description. This election followed Pope Urban VIII, who was famous for nepotism. His nephews, Cardinals Francesco and Antonio Barberini, were super wealthy, ambitious, and everyone expected them to basically control the conclave.
But it didn't work out that way.
Not at all. Spectacularly backfired, actually. And instead of working together, the brothers got into what one source calls an ugly bout of fraternal bickering.
Bickering?
Playground insults, apparently, massive bribes flying back and forth between their factions. Their infighting just split the conclave wide open.
So they undermined themselves.
Completely. After nearly bankrupting themselves with bribes, they finally had to agree on a compromise candidate, Giovanni Battista Pamphili, who became Pope Innocent X. Just shows how internal rivalries can wreck even the best-laid plans.
Their own squabbles did them in. Okay, one last historical stop. The election in exile, 1799 to 1800. What was unique here?
Well, Napoleon's invasion of Italy basically forced the Curia, the papal administration, to flee Rome. They ended up in Venice.
So the conclave wasn't even in Rome?
Nope, the last one held outside Rome. And it was under really chaotic conditions. Because of all the political upheaval in Europe, Only 34 cardinals could even make it, the lowest number in centuries.
And even that small group had issues.
Oh, absolutely. At first, they were actually locked out of St. Mark's Basilica because they wouldn't accept the Austrian emperor's preferred candidate.
Locked out.
Yeah. Eventually, they compromised on Barnaba Luigi Chiaramonti, who became Pius VII. But even then, some cardinals were grumbling because he'd once said good Christians could also be good Democrats. Pretty radical for the time.
And wasn't there something about his crown?
Yes, fittingly, given the circumstances, his coronation tiara was made of papier-mâché, and the ceremony was in a small church, a kind of symbol of the whole makeshift conclave.
Wow. What a history. So, having looked at all that drama and, frankly, chaos, let's pivot to today. What are the big challenges facing the church now as it looks towards the next conclave?
It's definitely a huge contrast between those historical scenes and the modern process. But, the fundamental importance of choosing the right leader for what's now a global church of 1.4 billion people, that's immense. And experts seem to agree the next pope needs this delicate balance. Deep faith, yes, but also really sharp governance skills.
Balance seems key. Let's start inside the church. What are the main divisions people talk about right now?
Well, sources point to a pretty noticeable divide within the College of Cardinals. Generally, it's seen as between reformers, who are mostly following Pope Francis's direction, and conservatives, who would prefer a return to the social conservatism of, say, Benedict XVI or John Paul II.
And this split affects big questions, like how to engage with the world.
Definitely. It touches on fundamental things, like how the church should evangelize today. Reformers often focus on social justice, being more inclusive towards LGBTQ+ people, divorced Catholics, supporting immigrants. They tend to want gradual change, maybe to avoid splitting the church.
Okay, and the conservatives?
Conservatives generally push back against what they see as secularism and relativism. They often express concern about the direction of some recent reforms, wanting more emphasis on traditional doctrine.
Then there's talk about the Third World Cardinals, or cardinals from the global south. Where do they fit?
Right. Cardinals from Africa, South America, Asia. They often have a mix of views. They might be quite socially conservative, sometimes even more so than Western cardinals, but they're also often strong advocates for social justice, climate action.
So they could be swing votes?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
They don't fit neatly into just one camp, which makes them really important players in a conclave.
And what specific issues from Francis's time are still kind of hanging fire, things the next pope has to deal with?
Well, there are several key areas still causing tension. The approach to divorce and remarriage, for instance, the whole ongoing discussion about synodality, that idea of more consultation, shared decision-making.
Right, synodality.
And the pastoral care for LGBTQ+ Catholics. These are big questions that weren't really definitively settled under Francis and will certainly need attention.
Unity comes up a lot, but people seem to mean different things by it.
Absolutely. There's a real debate among cardinals about how much to prioritize unity. Some, like Cardinal Czerny, actually warn against making it the top goal. They worry it could lead to a kind of bland uniformity, stifling the church's diversity, its Catholicity.
Versus the traditional view.
Versus the view that unity is absolutely essential, like Christ himself prayed for.
Yeah.
That it's crucial for the church's credibility, its mission.
And ironically, some of Francis's moves aimed at unity actually caused more division, didn't they?
That's what some argue, yeah. The restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass, for example, done in the name of unity, but seen by some as really undermining liturgical pluralism, alienating a whole group of Catholics.
And doctrinal questions.
Similarly, the handling of some doctrinal questions, like those raised about the document Amoris Laetitia, has been criticized by some as a missed chance for real dialogue, maybe even wounding unity. Even episcopal appointments, some argue, have sometimes deepened divisions. So yeah, the next pope faces this incredibly complex task, balancing unity with the genuine diversity that exists.
Okay, moving beyond those internal dynamics. The sexual abuse crisis, it's still a huge issue.
Huge. Sources are really clear. The church globally needs a full, transparent reckoning. It's not over.
What does that involve?
Sustained investment in procedures for handling abuse claims that are clear, transparent, and genuinely accountable. And critically, it's not just a North American or European problem anymore. It needs serious attention worldwide.
It's a difficult balance, though, isn't it? Addressing accusations while respecting due process.
It's incredibly delicate. But inconsistencies in how allegations have been handled, the Father Marco Repnick case is often cited, have really damaged trust. There's a strong sense the Vatican needs to be much more open to regain credibility.
Then there are the practicalities. Finances, governance.
Oh yeah, major challenges. The next pope absolutely needs strong governance skills and has to keep pushing financial reforms. Despite efforts over the past, say, 12 years, Vatican reform, especially financially, isn't seen as complete.
I've seen the financial situation described as quite dire.
That sounds accurate based on reports. There's a pressing need to finally stop the kind of mismanagement and, frankly, corruption that has surfaced periodically.
We've heard about the Vatican Bank, the IOR, having historical issues.
Right, and Pope Francis definitely made changes, set up the Secretariat for the Economy, brought in outside auditors, but there's still resistance, pushback.
So problems remain. Budget deficits, the pension fund?
Absolutely. There's a budget deficit, ongoing reliance on donations, which can be volatile, and a really significant deficit in the Vatican pension fund. Managing the Holy See effectively. Honestly, it requires skills almost like a top CEO.
That's a tall order. What about the core mission, evangelization?
Also crucial. Inspiring a renewed passion for mission across the whole global church. And the church needs to figure out its role in this world of rising nationalism, competing global powers.
And there are disagreements how to evangelize, too.
Yes, that split we mentioned earlier plays out here, too. Is it primarily about transmitting doctrine clearly or demonstrating mercy and accompaniment? Plus, you have declining church attendance in the West, a huge challenge. Do you liberalize things to try and attract people back, or does that risk alienating current members? And then there's the task of re-evangelizing secular Europe.
Some sources even talk about a moral and spiritual collapse. What's meant by that?
It refers to a perceived crisis of maybe clarity and conviction, where truth feels like just personal opinion, where conscience isn't linked strongly to moral formation, where being relevant seems more important than holiness.
And digital culture plays a role.
Yeah, that's mentioned too. The emphasis on image over substance, performance over prayer, online tribalism instead of real communion. The argument is the church needs to speak clearly again. Name the modern idols, maybe comfort, digital distraction, radical autonomy, indifference, and call people to something more demanding, more meaningful.
Okay, looking outwards now. External relations, diplomacy.
Definitely important in today's tense world. The next pope needs to be a really strong advocate for religious freedom everywhere, especially for persecuted Catholics. The Church's policy towards China is often mentioned as needing careful reevaluation.
And the Vatican's role on the world stage.
It has this unique position, doesn't it? A kind of neutral power with a respected voice, especially in the global south. Maintaining that influence and continuing interreligious dialogue, those are key diplomatic tasks.
Finally, the church is global. How do the geographical shifts impact things?
Hugely. You have massive growth, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. African Catholics often hold more socially conservative views than in the West. And their pressing issues might be quite different things like Western economic policies impacting their countries, local corruption, competition from other religions.
Different from Western concerns.
Often, yes. In the West, the focus might be more on declining numbers, secularism, the fallout from abuse scandals. The next pope somehow needs to understand and address both realities, both contexts. It's a truly global balancing act.
So if we pull all this together, the history, the current challenges, what are the essential qualities experts think the next pope absolutely needs?
Okay, synthesizing it all. Several things really stand out. First, a deep Christ-centered vision. That seems foundational.
Right.
Then a kind of fearlessness, rooted in faith in the resurrection, fidelity to truth, but also prophetic boldness to speak it.
And the ability to manage the internal diversity.
Crucial. Maintaining unity amidst all that diversity we talked about. Plus, effective leadership, the capacity for real reform, especially in governance, finance, and dealing decisively with the abuse crisis.
What else?
The ability to inspire that passion for mission globally. And finally, real skill in diplomacy on the world stage.
It's incredibly complex, isn't it? This interplay of centuries of history, the internal church dynamics right now, and all these external pressures shaping who gets chosen.
Absolutely. For you, our listener, wanting to get your head around important stuff efficiently, we hope this deep dive gives you some really valuable context for understanding what happens next time there's a conclave.
Yeah, it really does. And maybe it leaves you with a thought to mull over.
Exactly. Given everything we've discussed, the history of surprising outcomes, the sheer scale of the challenges today, what single quality do you think will be the most crucial for the next pope, and why? Something to reflect on.
A great question to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.